Hey guys, tonight we're saddling up for one of the slowest thrill rides in ancient history. Imagine this. The wind hums low across a cracked stone road. The scent of hot mule sweat and old olive oil clings to the air, and ahead of you stretches a straight, ruler-perfect Roman highway that seems to go on forever. You're clutching a sealed scroll under your tunic, bound for some official in a distant province, and you've got a dusty mule, a rough map, and the kind of road rations that make dried lentils seem luxurious. You're a courier in the Roman Empire. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment below with your location and local time. I love knowing who's tuning in and from where. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Roman world, for all its marble columns and tunic drama, was first and foremost a giant logistical headache. With an empire stretching from foggy Britannia to spicy Syria, emperors needed a way to keep tabs on things, so they paved it literally with roads. Over 250,000 miles of them, in fact, and about 50,000 miles were stone paved and built so straight they make modern highways feel drunk. But roads alone don't bring news. For that, Rome needed couriers, grimy, underpaid, mule-loving souls whose job was to shuffle information from point A to point B without dying, defecting, or dropping the scroll in a puddle. Tonight, you become one of them. Your journey begins not with a dramatic trumpet blast, but with the quiet thud of sandals against gravel. You've left a small villa just outside the Forum in Rome, where an imperial official handed you a satchel of messages, most sealed with wax and bearing the SPQR stamp, Senatus Populusque Romanus. It's Latin for, "We really don't want anyone else reading this." You adjust your belt, tighten your mule's harness, and trudge forward. Along the Via Appia, the queen of roads, you pass tombs of senators and forgotten generals, their names eroded into stone. One of them probably sent letters, just like the one bouncing against your hip. Historians still argue whether couriers always knew what they were carrying. Some suggest they were intentionally kept in the dark, mere meat puppets for papyrus. Others think they were briefed in case something went wrong and they needed to burn the documents mid-route. You pause for water at a public fountain where the pigeons drink, and a tired legionary warns you about bandits to the south. Your mule, aptly named Festina Lente, make haste, slowly snorts in agreement. The sun climbs higher. The heat bakes the road so fiercely it seems to sing beneath your feet. Your sandals are wearing thin. You glance over your shoulder every now and then, because some roads in this empire aren't just for couriers and soldiers. They're for thieves, spies, exiled poets, and the occasional donkey with a death wish. A passing cart rumbles by, full of amphorae. The driver shouts something about the latest grain shortage in Ostia. You nod, pretending to care, but your mind is already calculating the next way station mutatio, where if the gods are kind, you'll find a fresh mule, and maybe, just maybe, a half-decent crust of bread. Now, here's something odd. While the Romans had this immense road system, they never created a postal service for the common person. Nope. The entire thing, called the cursus publicus, was for official use only. You couldn't send Aunt Livia a birthday scroll unless you bribed someone. And people definitely bribed someone. The network was strictly controlled, but it had loopholes big enough to ride a chariot through. Governors lent out couriers for a favor. Merchants snuck in tax documents. There's even one ancient complaint letter where a senator rants about how his messages are delayed because some idiot's wine order got priority. Still, you keep moving. The scent of rosemary and manure mingles with the wind as you pass through a small village. A child waves. An old woman sells cheese that smells like betrayal. Somewhere up ahead, a bronze milestone glints a mark of imperial order. It tells you how far you've come and how far to go. Of course, it's in Roman miles. You still don't quite know how long that is. Suddenly, you remember something. You're not alone on this route. There are others out here, dozens, maybe hundreds, moving through the arteries of the empire. Some with scrolls, some with verbal dispatches, a few just trying to disappear. Every mile you travel, another courier passes in the opposite direction, carrying gossip commands, maybe even a love letter between nobles in Verona and Carthage. It's a whispering web of leather satchels and hoofbeats. And then something bizarre. On the side of the road stands a stone carving of Mercury, god of messengers. He's wearing winged sandals and holding a tortoise for some reason. No one knows why. Historians still argue whether it was symbolic of fast but steady or if the sculptor was just tired. You give the statue a nod as tradition demands and push onward. The sky begins to dim. The light hits the road at an angle that turns every stone to amber. You smell pine trees and smoke. Up ahead, your first relay station glows with the faint warmth of torches. A barking dog welcomes you like a sleep-deprived doorman. You made it. Inside, there's a scribe hunched over a ledger, his ink-stained fingers twitching. He eyes your seal checks, a wax tablet, then waves toward a stable where your next mule waits. You hand over the message satchel with the practiced shrug of someone who's done this before and survived. Just barely. And so your night ends in a wooden bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the squeak of mice and the snores of other couriers. Somewhere back in Rome, the official who gave you the scrolls is already writing more. Because tomorrow, you do this all over again. The smell of moldy straw and wet leather is your alarm clock. Before the rooster even has a chance to consider his options, you're back on your feet, slipping stiff sandals over tired feet and patting your next mule on the flank. His name scratched faintly into the wall above the stall appears to be recalcitrant. Fitting. Today's path leads you into the bones of Roman bureaucracy, a place where the postal system wasn't birthed out of love for communication, but from the military's need to shout across time zones. You see, Rome didn't start with a postal dream. It began with marching orders. Back in the Republic days, centuries before your current route was even paved, Rome's legions pushed outward, gobbling up territory like a hungry dorm student at an all-you-can-eat bread buffet. As the conquest grew messier, the Senate realized it couldn't just hope a message tied to a javelin would arrive in time. No, they needed something faster than foot messengers, but cheaper than divine intervention. So began the earliest form of communication relays, basic runners, horsemen, and soldiers passing dispatches from fort to fort. If you can imagine a chain of sweaty, suspiciously underfed men grunting, "Take this to the general," then congratulations, you've just visualized the birth of Rome's wartime courier system. And here's your mainstream historical fact for the day. The first organized courier services in Rome date back to the Punic Wars. Yes, the ones with Hannibal and those elephants. When Rome went toe-to-toe with Carthage, it wasn't just about who had more ships or better spears. It was about who got the memo first. Because nothing ruins a surprise ambush quite like delivering the battle orders after the fighting's already over. You lead your mule down a gravel-cut slope through a patch of pine-sweet woods. The quiet rustling is pleasant until you spot movement behind a tree. For a second, your heart stutters. Brigands. Again. But no, it's just another courier headed in the opposite direction, his tunic flapping in the breeze, a scroll bouncing from his belt. You exchange weary nods, the ancient equivalent of, yeah, same job, same back pain. Historians still argue whether these early military messengers were conscripted soldiers or hired specialists. Some sources suggest they were drawn from cavalry ranks, others from freedmen, desperate to rise through the social goo. What's certain is that the work was dangerous, and not just because of the occasional arrow. Back then, roads were patchy at best, more goat path than highway. Messengers had to deal with uneven terrain, unfriendly locals, and the ever-present danger of being mistaken for a spy. Because if you were caught with sealed messages on enemy turf, your day got very bad very fast. Picture this one poor courier intercepted during the Battle of Cannae, reportedly ate the entire message scroll before capture. You don't want to know how they got it back out. Let's just say waxed papyrus doesn't digest well. Your own stomach growls at the thought. Luckily, the next stop is a small way station nestled beside a grove of cypress trees. The woman tending it offers you a bit of barley mash, which tastes like boiled ambition and dust, but you're grateful. She complains about how late the last messenger was, muttering something about goats and sabotage. You nod politely, trying not to imagine what kind of sabotage involves goats. Here's a quirky tidbit for the road. At least one Roman fort reportedly used trained pigeons to deliver tiny scrolls in cases where speed outweighed secrecy. There's even a graffiti from Pompeii that shows a bird wearing what suspiciously resembles a message pouch. Did it work? Maybe. Historians still argue whether pigeons were ever officially part of the Roman messaging system or just a fun side hustle. You thank the woman remount recalcitrant and head on. The sun begins its lazy climb, casting your shadow long and lean ahead of you. As you ride, you begin to notice how the road is subtly crowned in the middle, designed so water runs off rather than pooling. Smart. Roman engineers didn't just build roads, they obsessed over them. And those roads, once they were tied into the war machine, became the foundation for something much bigger. In your satchel is a letter marked for the legate of the 9th Legion. He's currently stationed somewhere near modern-day Lyon, which means the message will pass through at least 10 relay stations and several dozen hands. You wonder if he'll read it in time. You wonder if it matters. The truth is, this system, the precursor to the cursus publicus, was never about speed. It was about consistency. Messages got there eventually. Maybe not before the siege ended. Maybe not before the senator changed his mind, but they arrived. In a world where distance meant danger, Rome's postal infrastructure was a promise one made with hoofbeats, patience, and a stubborn refusal to give up. You hear the bell of a distant traveler, and for a second, you imagine all the scrolls crossing the empire right now. Decrees, love poems, grocery requests, military orders, all carried by strangers across treacherous terrain. It's like being part of a nervous system, sprawling, fragile, and always a little behind schedule. As dusk rolls in the trees thin, and you emerge onto a wide ridge overlooking a crumbling villa. Somewhere far off, the lights of a larger mansio, a proper overnight rest station, begin to flicker. You aim recalcitrant that way, and your mule sighs clearly relieved. Tomorrow, you'll start learning about Augustus, the man who took these chaotic courier lines and turned them into a postal empire. But for now, you reach the station, unbuckle your belt, and collapse onto a straw mattress that smells faintly of goat sabotage. You sleep like someone who's walked half the empire. You wake up with hay in your hair and a scroll poking you in the ribs. Not your scroll, someone else's, probably dropped by that snoozing courier across from you who muttered in his sleep about deadlines and donkeys. Welcome back to the road. Today, though, you're not just hauling imperial laundry. You're officially operating inside the cursus publicus, the grand design of Emperor Augustus himself. And oh, Augustus didn't do things halfway. If Julius Caesar was the guy who threw parties with stabbings, Augustus was the empire's obsessive organizer, complete with color-coded tunics and backup spreadsheets carved in marble. After decades of war and senatorial drama, and some mild assassinations, Augustus knew that if Rome was going to survive beyond swordplay and toga gossip, it needed infrastructure. Cue the state-run postal system, the cursus publicus, literally the public course, which ironically had nothing public about it. This was Augustus's baby, a sleek, mule-powered system of relays, roads, and tightly controlled checkpoints designed to serve the needs of the empire. Not you, not your aunt, who wanted to mail pickled figs to Ephesus, just the emperor, the senate, the army, and anyone who could convincingly pretend to be all three. So now, as you saddle up again, scroll, pouch freshly stocked, and mule renamed, still recalcitrant, you're part of the system. Kind of. The roads are straighter now, smoother. You're on one of the official VE stone-paved, expertly drained, lined with mile markers so precise they could double as a GPS. The cursus publicus didn't just exist. It thrived, spanning the entire empire, like veins under skin. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Augustus established the cursus publicus around 20 BCE using a relay system that allowed couriers to swap tired animals for fresh ones at designated stations. With enough imperial urgency and maybe a hint of blackmail, a message could move 50 to 70 miles per day. Not too shabby for an era where shoes were basically fancy leather socks. You pause at a marker scratched with 16 miles to Neapolis. Your mule takes this as an opportunity to urinate on a bush. The symbolism is not lost on you. Each relay station you pass, a mutatio for quick swaps or a mansio for overnight stays, is a tiny outpost of imperial control. Painted in neutral tones, usually with a stable, a kitchen that serves mystery stew, and a records clerk who's seen too much. These stations were like truck stops without the vending machines. And Augustus wasn't just worried about moving messages. Oh no, he wanted standardization. Couriers had to carry diplomas, official permits to use the postal system. No diploma, no mule, no food, no help. Just a lot of walking and an awkward conversation with a guy holding a spear. Historians still argue whether Augustus invented this system from scratch, or borrowed it wholesale from earlier Persian models. The Persian Empire had a famously efficient postal network. Herodotus even praised it, which for Herodotus is basically a standing ovation. Some scholars believe Augustus simply adopted and refined it Roman style, with better roads and more bureaucracy. As you trot forward, the scenery changes. Hills roll into vineyards. You pass a crumbling statue of Mercury again, this one missing a nose but still carrying his awkward tortoise. Someone's carved Lucius was here into the pedestal. Even couriers get bored. Then a strange smell ink oil and slightly burned parchment. You've stumbled across a mobile scriptorium, scribes on the move, copying letters and duplicating dispatches en route. These pop-up writing squads were essential in the cursus publicus for handling multiple copies updates or oops wrong address moments. Imagine a bunch of ink-stained interns sitting in a tent muttering curses in Latin. That's them. Here's a quirky tidbit. One scribe's travel journal discovered centuries later includes doodles of chickens in Roman armor. Were they mascots? Boredom sketches. Historians still argue whether chickens ever served ceremonial roles in the postal system, or if the scribe was just well weird. Your stomach growls. A nearby mancio offers you a bowl of watery soup and a heel of bread hard enough to qualify as a weapon. Still, it's warm, and that's enough. The station keeper, a leathery man with a voice like gravel in a rain barrel, checks your diploma and nods slowly. You're late, he says, though you're not. That's just his way of saying hello. He points toward a fresh mule already harnessed. This one is named Claudia. She looks judgmental. As the sun reaches its peak, heat radiates off the stones in slow waves. You spot a military convoy in the distance, flags snapping in the wind. You wonder if they'll use the cursus publicus too. They probably will. Everyone does, if they can. Governors, generals, even actors carrying scripts for imperial theater festivals. Of course, not everyone uses it legally. You pass a dusty-looking fellow with 2 clean boots and a slightly too nice scroll tube. That's probably a senator's cousin using a forged diploma. It happens. There are even records of diploma forgery rings operating out of provincial cities. Augustus tried to clamp down on it, but hey, power finds a way. Still, for now, the system works. You push on through the late afternoon, the road stretching ahead like a ribbon woven through the empire's bones. Each step, each hoofbeat carries you deeper into a world where messages, not just armies, build empires. And if you squint far down the road, you can almost imagine a future where this network becomes the model for systems yet to come. Medieval couriers, Renaissance mail carriers, even the postmen in goofy hats, riding scooters, all of them, in some tiny dusty way, owe a nod to Augustus and his mule-powered machine. But that's for later. Tonight, you ride into the next station scroll pouch, a little lighter, boots a little thinner, and back a little stiffer. Claudia grunts as she's led away. She did well. For a mule with opinions. And as you settle into your next bunk, this one slightly less goat-scented you think, not for the first time, that this empire isn't held together by legions or marble. It's held together by messages and mules. You're woken not by a cockcrow or a sunbeam, but by Claudia's braying. Loud, relentless, and oddly judgmental, as if she's reminding you that yes, You still have half the empire to cross, and no, the scrolls don't deliver themselves. You swing your legs off the cot joints, creaking like ungreased hinges. The innkeeper hands you a chunk of salted. Something could be meat, could be shoe leather, and tells you the next leg's uphill. Naturally, as Claudia clip-clops into a steady rhythm, you start to notice the little details that make the cursus publicus tick. Every station is laid out the same way. You've probably memorized the smell by now, burning olive oil manure ink and a whiff of vinegar used to clean the stable buckets. You can guess the station master's age based on how deeply the sigh echoes when he signs off your diploma. And that's the brilliance of it. This wasn't some cobbled-together relay system run by freelance messengers and half-blind donkeys. No, this was organized, centralized, bureaucratized Roman style. Think spreadsheets carved in stone and a job title for everything right down to guy who sharpens wax tablets. You pass through another mutatio, little more than a stable and a stone bench. The stable boy barely looks up as he swaps Claudia for a new mule. His name's Vespasian. Don't ask why. You don't. With your new partner, you hit the road again, winding through olive groves and low hills. The roads feel different now, wider, better maintained. That's because you're nearing a section that was once part of a high-priority military corridor. Augustus's engineers prioritized routes based on strategic need. And if your scroll happens to mention troop movements or grain deliveries, congrats, your priority mail. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The cursus publicus wasn't just about roads. It relied heavily on postal workers called curatores and praefecti vehiculorum, imperial officials, tasked with overseeing stations, ensuring supplies, and punishing anyone who dared slow down the flow of information. If a mule died, someone filled out paperwork. If a scroll went missing, someone got demoted. Or worse, reassigned to Britannia. And if there's one thing you've learned, it's this. Romans loved a good administrative structure. Nothing was ever left to chance. Except the weather, or barbarian raids, or mules that refused to move during an eclipse. It's said one courier had to bribe his own mount with dried figs after the beast developed a suspicious fear of bridges. Which brings us to a fringe curiosity. Did you know some relay stations had pet peacocks, not for vanity, but as living alarms? Their piercing calls alerted staff to approaching couriers or potential bandits. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or just the bizarre hobby of one overly dramatic station keeper with a love of feathers and flair. You imagine a peacock judging your sandal tan and move on. Midway through the day, you reach a mansio. This one's a bit grander, built with stone columns and even boasting a mosaic floor. It was likely funded by a wealthy patron hoping to gain favor with the emperor. There's a bathhouse next door. Steam curls from its tiled roof like a promise. You slip inside for a quick rinse. The tepidarium is lukewarm at best, but your dust-caked arms are grateful. A grumbling legionary in the corner tells you the bath's heat went out last month, and no one's fixed it. Bureaucracy, he mutters. Even in an empire of scrolls and orders, someone always forgets to send the memo. You dry off with a towel that smells faintly of vinegar and horse and head to the scriptorium. This one is better staffed. 2 scribes, both balding, one snoring. They glance at your scroll, take a copy, and hand you a sealed duplicate with a fresh wax stamp. You're a living fax machine. As you prepare to head out again, a group of travelers enter merchants based on their heavy packs and loud bargaining. One of them tries to chat you up, asking if you'll carry a personal message for a fee. You shake your head. Not allowed. Not unless you want a stern lecture from an overworked prefectus and a long assignment somewhere with no wine. But let's be honest, plenty of couriers did it anyway. Side hustling messages for coin favors or even gossip. The cursus publicus was strictly monitored, yes, but the farther you got from Rome, the looser the rules became. By the time you hit the provinces, it was all creative interpretation and well-placed bribes. Historians still argue whether this undermined or strengthened the system. On the one hand, it added inefficiency. On the other, it kept information flowing, even unofficially. After all, in Rome, what you know is important, but who you know gets your message delivered faster. Outside, the weather shifts. Rain begins soft at first, then hard enough to turn the road to a slurry of mud and regret. Vespasian, the mule slogs on ears flattened. You pull your cloak tighter, praying the scrolls in your pouch stay dry. A courier once wrapped messages in oiled goat hide during a storm, and later discovered the text had transferred backward onto the leather. The first Roman mirror writing. Evening falls like a curtain. A fire glows at the next mutatio. Inside, a young boy takes your mule, offers you warm wine, likely watered down, and a plate of lentils so overcooked they could be used as paste. You eat anyway. Another courier sits across from you, older grizzled scar across his chin. He tells you stories of a time he delivered a message to the emperor himself. You nod, unsure if he's exaggerating, but grateful for the company. Before sleep, you scratch a small mark into the wooden wall. Your name, the date, the direction you're headed. A quiet reminder that you passed through, that the road kept moving, and so did you. Tomorrow, more scrolls, more mules, more stations, and somewhere far ahead, maybe even a message worth remembering. The fire in the hearth has long since turned to ash when you awaken cold, stiff, and vaguely aware of having dreamed about being chased by an angry goat wielding a wax tablet. You shake it off. Maybe that scribe's lentils really were too fermented. The road outside is misty quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your ears and makes you feel like you're the last person in the empire still moving. But that's not true. Somewhere on the horizon, other couriers just like you are trudging forward, scrolls clutched to their chests like sacred relics, whispering secrets from one province to the next. Today, you're carrying scripta secreta classified documents. You can tell by the crimson wax seal and the heavy leather wrapping. It's not addressed to a governor or military outpost, but to a palace official in Ravenna, which means two things. First, this message didn't come from just anyone. And second, it's not the kind of scroll you want to lose. You tuck it securely under your tunic, away from the rain-slick road and prying eyes. The cursus publicus wasn't just for standard orders or census updates. It was also the empire's intelligence bloodstream. Everything from tax reports to troop betrayals traveled these roads. And if it absolutely positively had to get there discreetly, It came with extra layers, secret compartments, hidden ink, or occasionally messages committed entirely to memory by couriers trained to recite with perfect recall. That's right. Some couriers didn't carry anything at all, just words rehearsed over and over until they became muscle memory. The Roman version of secure messaging via meat-based cloud storage. Historians still argue whether these memory couriers were widely used or reserved for extreme cases, but records mention them in times of political instability when even scrolls could be intercepted or forged. After all, it's harder to tamper with a message that only exists inside someone's head, unless you're very persuasive with a dagger. Your mule today is named Fortuna. She's smaller, lighter on her feet, and seems to understand sarcasm, judging by the look she gives you when you nearly slip on a pile of olive skins dumped outside a roadside tavern. You pick your way down a side road that veers toward the Apennines. The terrain grows steeper, rockier, with clouds clinging to the cliffs like gossip in a Senate hallway. And now you're thinking about imperial paranoia, because emperors, especially after Augustus, loved knowing what everyone was up to. Postal routes became surveillance tools. Governors were expected to write regular reports. Spies, politely called speculatores, often traveled under the guise of couriers. And some scrolls? Oh, they weren't just messages. They were traps. Deliver one, and the recipient might find themselves arrested within the hour. Quirky fact time. There's a theory that one message delivered during Tiberius's reign was written in lemon juice, completely invisible, until it was heated by a lamp. Yes, ancient, invisible ink. Historians still argue whether this story is fact or just the fever dream of a retired palace scribe with too much time and citrus. You pause for a drink at a small spring. The water is freezing, biting, but clear. Across the road, a milestone leans at an odd angle, its engraving worn to a whisper. You make out the letters Tiber, Cies, barely clinging to the surface. A marker from another reign, another message, another mule long turned to dust. As you ride, you notice how each region seems to shape the postal route differently. In the flat plains, the roads are wide, straight, arrogant. But here in the hills, the path twists like political loyalty. You're not just navigating terrain, you're navigating Rome itself. Its egos, its paranoia, its relentless need for control. It makes sense that secret messages became such a regular feature. When everyone's watching, everyone else, every scroll becomes a potential weapon. Even the most innocent letter might contain a coded insult, a veiled threat, or instructions for a quiet assassination at the next banquet. In fact, one courier once delivered a message instructing a provincial noble to host a senator with extreme courtesy. The senator later died of poisoned wine. Historians still argue whether the phrase was a euphemism or if the noble just got creative with his interpretation. You begin to descend, now the air warming slightly. A field of poppies sways beside the road. Fortuna snorts at a nearby sheep who looks equally offended. Ahead, a low wall and a carved wooden gate mark the entrance to a larger relay station. You're waved in by a guard wearing the faded insignia of the imperial service. Inside the mancio is bustling two mules being reshoed, a scribe dictating to a bored apprentice, and someone arguing loudly about missing parchment. You hand over your classified scrolls. The clerk's eyebrows lift at the red seal, and he whistles low. "You didn't look important," he says. You shrug. That's the point. Inside the scriptorium, they don't make copies. These messages are hand-delivered to specific people. No backup, no archive. You begin to wonder what it says. A transfer of funds. A recall order. Instructions to eliminate a rival. Or just someone asking for more ink. You'll never know. You're given a fresh pouch for your return journey, lighter this time. A few routine dispatches, a small wooden token, sealed with wax, and a note from a station master up north requesting new sandals. It's not always espionage. Sometimes it's just footwear. That night, you sit by the fire rubbing your sore ankles and chewing on a date someone left in a shared ration bowl. The stars shimmer above the tiled roof. Someone sings softly in Latin nearby, off-key but warm. And as you rest your head, your thoughts drift again, not to scrolls or seals, but to all the stories slipping silently through the empire carried by people like you. Ghosts with saddlebags. Some messages save cities. Some start wars. Some simply ask for sandals. And all of them move by Mule. The soft creak of wooden beams above your head signals dawn. You're up before most of the station stirs, your fingers fumbling with your belt as you repack the message pouch. 2 scrolls, 1 pouch of coins sealed with wax, and the sandal request still absurdly detailed. The Empire's priorities, it seems, are wide-ranging. You stretch your back swing, a leg over your next companion. This one's called Optimus, a name that feels overly confident, and set off toward the next stretch of imperial ribbon laid out across the land. This leg is a long one. No major cities along the way, just outposts and small stops known as stations, sometimes indistinguishable from plain old villages. That's by design. Augustus and his successors didn't just build these waypoints for function, they also built them to blend. The more invisible the empire's veins, the more invulnerable they seemed. And these stops, they're not all created equal. You've already encountered the bare-bones mutationes with nothing more than a water trough and a grumpy stable hand, but now you're heading toward a full-fledged mansio. These were like ancient Roman truck stops, but less burrito and more barley. Still, they were essential. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mansiones were formal relay stations, offering overnight lodging, food stables, and occasionally even hot baths for couriers, military officials, and other agents of the state. They were spaced roughly 15 to 20 Roman miles apart, about a full day's travel by mule or horse. The empire built hundreds of them across its vast territory, from the limes of Germania to the sands of Africa. Each one a miniature node of order and message control. As Optimus clops along, you imagine the imperial courier maps, a web of stations dotting the known world ink lines sprawling from Rome like spider silk. An empire defined not just by conquest, but by communication. The landscape shifts subtly around you. Gentler hills, olive trees, giving way to farmland. A farmer waves at you while hauling what looks suspiciously like an illegal wine shipment. You nod in mutual understanding. Soon the mansio appears, stone walls, a tiled roof columns worn by time. There's even a carved relief of Mercury above the entrance, his expression unusually smug. You're met by a bustling staff scribes at a central desk, a mule handler gesturing you toward the stables, and an innkeeper who barely glances up from her wax tablet. She's tallying supply inventories, hay oil, barley wine, and apparently emergency sandals, which continue to haunt your journey. You hand in your pouch. A clerk with a hooked nose and elaborate handwriting records your arrival. "Where from?" he asks, already scribbling. You name your last stop. He nods, as if that explains your worn boots and haunted eyes. This mansio is unusually well stocked. There's a hot bathhouse, small but real, a clean cot, even a kitchen with something that resembles stew rather than punishment. It's almost luxurious. You ease into the bath, grateful for the heat. The water smells faintly of herbs and disappointment, but it's warm, and that's enough. Nearby, two other couriers whisper about a new edict from the emperor, something about tax revisions in Illyria. You catch fragments, silver-weight, adjusted nobles complaining, dispatches running behind. It hits you again. You're not just moving mail. You're moving imperial will. Scrolls like the ones in your satchel are how emperors assert control across vast distances. No emails, no magical birds, just people like you sweating through a tunic with a mule that hates bridges. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some more remote provinces, relay stations doubled as mini fortresses. Raiders knew couriers carried valuable intel and sometimes money, so these posts had reinforced walls towers and even guard rotations. One ancient logbook includes a report of a message theft repelled by dogs and shouting. Historians still argue whether the dogs were trained for combat or just particularly loud. After your bath, you step into the scriptorium. It smells of wax parchment and stale ambition. A young scribe inspects your dispatches, nods with perfunctory approval, and hands you a new pouch. You peek inside 3 scrolls, 1 wooden tablet, and what looks like a tiny bronze token. The tablet bears a wax-sealed note addressed to a magistrate in a mountain village. The token, according to the scribe, is for toll access on a small private bridge. The last guy didn't have one, he adds, and got stuck arguing with a goat. You thank him and head to the stables. Optimus has been brushed fed and now looks slightly more trustworthy. You mount and continue along the road, this time curving through narrow valleys. The sun slants westward, casting golden light across the path. You pass a stretch of road so perfectly paved, it seems modern, each stone fitted with obsessive precision. You marvel at how, despite earthquakes, floods, and the occasional rampaging tribe, these roads still hold. And it's not just the stones, it's the planning. Every mansio, mutatio, and statio was part of a machine, the cursus publicus, that only functioned if each part moved on time. You think about all the things that had to work: roads, animals, paperwork, people. Especially people. And people, well, they're the wild card. You remember that station master from 2 stops ago, the one who drank half your travel wine before noon, or the scribe who accidentally sealed your message to Alexandria with the wrong crest and nearly started a shipping delay. These are the cracks in the system, the human hiccups in an empire that desperately wanted to believe it was infallible. Historians still argue whether Rome's bureaucracy ultimately strengthened the cursus publicus or slowed it to death by scrollwork. But for now, it works. You're proof of that. You're still moving, still delivering, still showing up at distant stone buildings with dust in your teeth and another message in hand. Dusk approaches. You arrive at your evening station, another mansio, this one quieter, built into the side of a hill. Inside, there's a fire, a warm drink, and a bunk that doesn't creak quite as much as the last one. The mule handler takes Optimus with a knowing nod. His name, apparently, is ironic. You stretch, yawn, and collapse into bed. The scrolls have been handed off. The token is tucked safely away for tomorrow's bridge. The empire hums on scroll by scroll, mule by mule, and you sleep. Because in the morning, it all starts again. Before the stars have even fully melted from the sky, you're on the move again. The bunk may have been softer than usual, and the lentils only half as tragic, but nothing delays the cursus publicus. Not a good night's sleep, not aching knees, not even the mild realization that your sandals are beginning to disintegrate from sheer effort. Your next stretch includes 3 station swaps in a single day, each roughly 15 Roman miles apart. It's a fast-track route, one designated for higher priority messages, which unfortunately for your legs means fewer excuses to linger. The scroll you're carrying bears an imperial seal again, though this time it's just plain red wax. No velvet pouch, no extra wrapping, just one small tag: urgent. And when Rome says urgent, they mean run, don't trudge. Optimus has been traded in for a feisty mule named Neptune, who seems entirely too full of energy for this hour of the morning. You climb aboard, gripping the reins tightly. Neptune bolts forward like he's auditioning for the chariot team. As dawn bleeds over the hills, you press into a narrow valley, cut by an aqueduct, its arches towering above like stone sentinels. The road narrows, hemmed in by the cliffside and a thin stream, and suddenly the urgency of your task feels personal. A single misplaced stone, a wrong step, and you tumble right into the cold bureaucratic arms of the afterlife. You pass a troop of legionaries headed west. They eye you and your pouch with vague disinterest, but one of them nods. That's the secret handshake of the imperial courier. A tilt of the head, a flick of the eyes, and an understanding that you're both cogs in the same immense wheel. Today's leg is all about speed deadlines measured in hooves. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Messages within the cursus publicus system were often transported in relay format. A single message might pass through 10 to 20 different hands from origin to destination. Couriers didn't usually complete full journeys. Instead, messages traveled like batons in a race, hopping from rider to rider, mule to mule. Except sometimes, like now, no relay was available, and so couriers were expected to do what they could to reach the next station faster than scheduled on mules that had definitely not been designed for sprinting. You grimace as Neptune careens down a slope, narrowly avoiding a rock that could have turned you into a historical footnote. At the bottom of the hill sits a humble mutatio. Just a post, a man and a mule. The man doesn't ask questions, just checks your diploma, hands you a fresh beast named Crassus, who looks exactly as cheerful as his name, and points up the next hill. No stew, no wine, Not even a good luck. You keep moving. And here's where it gets interesting. That urgent message you're carrying. It's likely not about war or scandal. It might be something as mundane as a change in tax policy or a border adjustment between two backwater provinces. But to the empire, even the dullest details mattered, because every little message was a stitch in Rome's fabric. And if one thread came loose, things could unravel fast. Still, not every courier took this responsibility seriously. There's a story from the reign of Hadrian about a courier who was caught selling imperial messages to a rival governor. He apparently wanted a nicer horse. That courier disappeared soon after. And the horse. According to one record, it ended up in the Senate stables. Historians still argue whether this was an accident or a very pointed joke. As you ride, you reach one of the oldest Roman bridges still in use. The stones beneath you are older than your great-grandfather's memories. Carved into the railing is a worn inscription, maintained by order of Augustus, rebuilt by Trajan. There's moss between the slabs and a few suspicious cracks, but it holds. Just barely. The scroll pouch thumps softly at your side. By midday, the sun has begun to boil overhead. The road ahead glimmers hazy and unreal. You stop briefly at a mansio set atop a rise, its walls sun-bleached and cracked. The station master, a woman with arms like olive tree trunks, inspects your message, whistles at the seal, and offers you a crust of bread that could be used as a weapon. She doesn't let you linger. "You've got 1 hour," she says. "That mule gets watered, you get fed, and then you're gone." This is how the system maintains urgency, not with whip-cracking overseers, but with quietly efficient people who've been doing this longer than you've been alive. You scarf the bread, drink some watered wine, and check Crassus's hooves, surprisingly sound. He might not be fast, but he'll endure. A few hours later, you're crossing a wide valley where stone columns rise like fossilized trees, remnants of an old, triumphal arch. Maybe it once welcomed victors home from some forgotten campaign. Now, it watches you pass with silent judgment, your message humming with potential consequence. Here's a quirky fact. Some messages had to be delivered within 3 days, even if the distance spanned over 200 miles. That meant night travel. And while not common, Rome did experiment with glow-in-the-dark paint, using crushed shells and a certain kind of algae to mark dangerous curves or bridges for couriers galloping through the night. Historians still argue whether this method actually worked, or just gave the mules more things to panic about. As evening nears, the terrain flattens again, the wind cooling the sweat from your brow. Crassus plods forward, unfazed, your last stop of the day. Visible in the distance, a low building with a red-tiled roof, smoke curling lazily from a chimney. The station master here greets you with a quiet nod. "You're early," he says, slightly surprised. You hand him the scroll, and for the first time today, your shoulders feel lighter. He stares at the seal. "This one's headed north again, isn't it?" You shrug. Not your business, not your burden anymore. You're offered a meal, a cot and a mule for tomorrow. Her name, the stable boy says, is Minerva. "She's clever," he adds. "Too clever." You settle into your bunk muscles, aching but satisfied. Today, you weren't just a messenger. You were a gear in the great machine propelling the Emperor's will across mountain passes and cracked stones. Your message made it on time. And in this empire, that means everything. Minerva is already awake, when you reach the stables the next morning, staring at you with unsettling intensity. She's one of those mules who seems to know exactly how much authority she has and exactly how much you don't. Still, she doesn't buck or bite, which already puts her in the top 20% of mules you've met. Your route today winds through a series of provincial towns, each nestled into Roman control like decorative tiles in a sprawling mosaic. With your scroll pouch secured and the station master's gruff send-off still echoing in your ears, try not to die this time. You nudge Minerva onto the road. This part of your journey introduces you to the tangled relationship between postal politics and imperial power. Because while the cursus publicus was designed as a tool of order and efficiency, it often became a playground for people with titles, egos, and too much time on their hands. That includes governors. Ah, yes, provincial governors. A species known for their love of authority, their fine taste in imported wine, and their persistent habit of bending the postal rules like wet reeds. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Though the cursus publicus was officially limited to state, business governors routinely abused their power to use the postal system for personal or political gain. From shipping family heirlooms to requesting rare spices from far-off provinces, they used imperial resources like a private courier service. You pass a fortified villa just off the main road. The guards outside eye you lazily until they spot the imperial seal on your pouch. Then it's all bowed heads and open gates. You don't stop, but it's always interesting to see how quickly respect can be borrowed when you're carrying someone else's authority. You reach the next mutatio, where a scroll exchange awaits. This one comes from a governor's office. Another urgent dispatch marked with no details and sealed far too elaborately. A local scribe quietly mutters that it's probably a dinner invitation or a favor request for someone's cousin in Hispania. You shrug. It's not your job to judge. But the truth is, postal corruption ran deep. There's a famous complaint letter written by Pliny the Younger, a governor and noted overachiever, where he rants about how his predecessor used the cursus publicus to transport marble busts. Not messages, not orders. Busts. Imagine hauling someone's smug stone face 400 miles just because they wanted it in their summer home. Historians still argue whether Pliny exaggerated or whether it was a common abuse. But there are records, actual written directives, pleading with officials to stop sending personal shipments via public mules. Still, who's going to stop a man who controls an entire province? You ride on, and the weather shifts. A low, cool breeze picks up, and storm clouds gather near the mountains ahead. A good courier checks not just the road, but the sky. Rain means slower travel. Slower travel means trouble. The next station you reach is understaffed and clearly struggling. The stable is half collapsed, the innkeeper absent, and the replacement mule is missing altogether. A young boy with ink-stained hands explains the last courier borrowed the best mule and hasn't returned in 2 days. You glance at Minerva, who glares at you as if to say, "You're stuck with me, pal," so you press forward. The road narrows, cut between cliffs slick with moss. A passing caravan pulls aside to let you through merchants clearly with heavy wagons and wary eyes. One of them whispers a warning. Bandits struck a courier 2 nights ago, took everything, even the mule. You tighten your cloak and quicken your pace. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some provinces, governors would hire mercenaries to escort high-value messages, especially during political transitions. One such group, known as the Night Vultures, operated in the Balkans and was infamous for their use of trained dogs and signal fires. Were they effective? Probably. Were they terrifying? Absolutely. You reach a lookout point just before dusk. From here, the land unfolds below like a wrinkled map. A river cuts across the plain, shimmering with the last of the light. Down there somewhere is your next station. The descent is slow and muddy. Minerva nearly loses her footing twice, and you begin composing a strongly worded letter in your head about road maintenance. But eventually, miraculously, you arrive. The Mancio is bustling again. It's near a regional capital, and tonight the place is stuffed with travelers, couriers, merchants. One man loudly insisting he's an envoy of Jupiter. No one believes him. You squeeze into the scriptorium, hand off the governor's elaborate scroll, and receive a smaller one in return. This one is labeled Interprovincial Audit Summary. You groan. You know what that means. Someone's losing a tax exemption. While eating your now familiar lentil mush, a fellow courier tells you of a scandal in Gaul. A governor was caught using the imperial mail to send love poems to 5 different people in 3 different cities, all at once. The fallout: immediate reassignment to a border post so remote, even maps forget about it. Historians still argue whether his exile was political punishment or simply poetic justice. Back in your bunk, you think about how fragile this all is. The empire, the roads, the messages, all of it balanced on human hands, and egos, and mules. Governors might misuse it. Senators might manipulate it. And somewhere an unpaid scribe is definitely forging a seal right now. But still, it works. Somehow, the machine lumbers forward, leaking dignity but delivering dispatches. And you're still riding, still surviving, still part of the system. Even if the next scroll you carry is just a poem from one hopeless romantic to another. The sun rises behind you as you ride northward, casting long shadows that slant across the road like old scars. Minerva's hooves click against the stone with practiced rhythm, each step bringing you deeper into the provinces, into the outer reaches, where the empire begins to blur at the edges, where the Latin starts to fade into other tongues, and where the mail slows. You're entering the domain of the provincial citizen Roman by law, distant by geography, and often forgotten by bureaucracy. These are the people who wait weeks, sometimes longer, for the scrolls you carry. They are farmers, artisans, scribes, tax collectors, mid-level officials, and the occasional philosopher who insists on corresponding with senators hundreds of miles away. And their scrolls, not glamorous, not urgent, but deeply important. Your pouch, today, holds just 3 items. 1 tax clarification, destined for a small village magistrate. 1 birth certificate, replacement from a registrar's office, and your favorite, a message from a Roman teacher in Gaul to his sister back in Italia. It's been sealed with wax and tied in ribbon, which is already a little soggy. You're carrying postcards from the provinces. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Though the cursus publicus was officially intended only for government use, provincial officials often stretch this definition to include personal and local correspondence. And while this skirted legality, Rome mostly turned a blind eye because ignoring a few love letters was easier than rebuilding trust when communication collapsed. You pass a farmhouse whose walls are painted with faded red murals, imperial iconography clinging stubbornly to rural brick. A boy stands outside waving. His tunic is too big, his grin toothy. You wave back. The family likely hasn't seen an official courier in weeks. As you wind through narrow streets in a hill town, a man stops you politely desperate. "Are you bound for Capua?" he asks, clutching a folded piece of papyrus. "My daughter is ill. Her husband must be told." You want to say yes. Every part of you wants to take it. But the rules are clear. No unauthorized mail. Unless, of course, you want to lose your diploma and be reassigned to some far-flung island where the only traffic is sheep. You sigh and shake your head gently. Not allowed. He nods, disappointed but understanding. He's probably asked this question 100 times before. You think about that letter all day. At the next mutatio, a young woman named Sabina manages the relay. She's fast, sharp, and utterly unfazed by your arrival. She swaps Minerva for a stocky mule named Pius, short for not as fast as he looks. While she checks your credentials, she casually hands you a scribbled list of supply shortages. Ink oil, parchment, clean sandals. You add it to the pouch without question. You ask her how often she sees imperial couriers. Every 4 or 5 days, she says. Unless Rome's on fire again. Is it, you ask? Probably. She smirks and waves you onward. You trudge into the foothills of a region where Latin coexists with local dialects. Here, even the milestones seem confused, some in elegant script, others barely etched. Roads narrow. The stations are fewer, and yet the people still wait for scrolls like yours. Here's your quirky tidbit. In one isolated province, a retired centurion reportedly created his own unofficial postal route on foot, delivering local messages for coin cheese or favors. His name was Marcus Lento, and he became so reliable that citizens painted his likeness on a public wall, complete with a donkey named Pax. Historians still argue whether Marcus was a rebel, a local hero, or just very bored. The provincial mansio you reach before nightfall is humble wooden walls, thatched roof, and a small kitchen that smells of garlic and rain. You trade scrolls with a clerk who works barefoot and refers to your mule as the new guy. You correct her. Pius has been doing this longer than either of you. Over lentil stew and dried figs, the clerk shows you something strange, a half-burned scroll fragment found near the last station. It's unreadable now, just ash and memory. You both wonder what it once said. Maybe just a supply list. Maybe something that would have changed someone's life. And just like that, you realize these little messages, these dry scraps of ink and wax and effort, they're not meaningless. They connect people. They hold families together across mountains, remind tax offices who was born where tell lonely scribes their siblings are still alive. They matter. Even the teacher's scroll, the one tied in ribbon, might be the difference between silence and a smile on the other end of the empire. Historians still argue whether the cursus publicus adapted well to provincial needs or whether it eventually drowned under the weight of its own inefficiency. But you see the human side. The scrolls might move slowly here, but they do move. And that's something. You fall asleep in a cot that smells like old papyrus, the sound of rain tapping against the roof, Pius snoring in the stable, and the faint rustle of one more scroll waiting to be delivered. Tomorrow, it travels farther, and so do you. By morning, the rain has stopped, but left behind a fog that clings low to the ground, ghosting between olive trees and creeping along the road like a bored spirit. You nudge Pius into motion, his hooves muffled by the damp earth. Today's journey is quieter. The world wrapped in soft mist and softer thoughts. The scroll pouch at your side feels heavier, not from weight, but from meaning. Among your dispatches is another imperial seal. This one isn't particularly ornate, but the name on the tag says enough direct to the imperial palace. You're not headed to the emperor himself, not quite, but someone who whispers in his ear. That makes you the whisper's feet. And when you carry a scroll to the emperor's court, you're part of the emperor's eye. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The cursus publicus was one of the emperor's most vital tools for controlling the empire, not just administratively, but emotionally. Messages weren't just information. They were surveillance, connection, warning, and reassurance. The postal service was how emperors saw everything from border unrest to the price of sardines in Alexandria. Even Augustus, the empire's founding father, is said to have received weekly updates from provincial governors, sometimes daily, if the mood struck. And his successors, they took that habit and ran with it. Emperors wanted to know everything, not just military developments, but road conditions, local famines, grain shipment delays, even how quickly their portraits were being placed in new town forums. One particularly fussy ruler, Domitian, if the stories are true, demanded weather reports from Cappadocia every 5 days. The wind off the mountains displeases him, one scribe reportedly said. Historians still argue whether these obsessive updates made the emperors better rulers or simply more anxious ones. You suspect the latter. Anyone who wants to know the mood of wheat farmers in Lusitania probably needs a hobby. As you travel, you notice the stations are becoming cleaner, more uniform, the staff more professional. The empire, you've learned, organizes itself like concentric circles. The closer you get to Rome or a palace city, the more polished things become. You've arrived at a station where the stables don't smell like rot, the scribe has all his teeth, and the innkeeper actually says good morning. Progress. You hand over a scroll, bound for a senator, receive a brief nod and a hot cup of watered wine, and move on. Pius doesn't protest. You suspect he's secretly enjoying the fame. Later in the day, you crest a hill and find yourself staring out over a plain of barley fields, each plot meticulously squared, each farmhouse marked by the same red-tiled roof and tiny shrine. From this height, it almost looks planned. And it was. That's the eerie part. The emperor's eye didn't just watch people, it watched the land. Postal messages carried census reports, land disputes, crop yields, and road damage assessments. Every patch of empire was documented, measured, and recorded, and sometimes disputed. A courier once carried a single scroll from one province to another back and forth for over 9 months. The scroll contained a property line disagreement. Both parties refused to compromise. The result, endless messages, increasingly petty, and one very tired mule named Augustus Minor. You pass a milestone marked with the emblem of Hadrian, his reign noted for infrastructure and micromanagement. You imagine him squinting at a map, wondering why it takes 6 days to move a letter from Noricum to Dalmatia. Then again, maybe he just wanted to know if the bridge near that one hill was still crooked. Here's a quirky tidbit. It said Emperor Claudius had scrolls delivered twice a day during his brief stay in Gaul, not for political updates. No, he just liked getting updates from his garden back home. The vines miss you, one scroll reportedly said. Historians still argue whether this was real or just a scribe's attempt at early satire. By late afternoon, you ride into a marble-capped town with wide streets and unusually well-swept corners. You're getting close to an imperial residence. You feel it. The station here is guarded not by one bored soldier, but a full unit. They inspect your pouch thoroughly. One scroll is taken, carried inside under close watch. The rest, returned. Apparently, you're not important enough for tea with the court. That's fine. You didn't want tea anyway. While you wait, a clerk offers you a peek into their fast dispatch storage, a locked cabinet of messages marked with crimson ribbons. For the Emperor's eyes only, he says, grinning before locking it again. You wonder what they say. Maybe a plot against a senator. Maybe a recipe request from the Empress. Maybe a report on how dust is collecting on a bust of Nero in Antioch, and someone should really do something about it. As night falls, you're escorted to a private quarters, nicer than anything you've seen in weeks. The bed has a real cushion. The stew comes with spices. The wine is not water. You lie there staring at the ceiling, wondering what it would feel like to be the Emperor's eye, to see everything, to know everything, to have armies and roads and scrolls dance at your fingertips. But then you remember, the scrolls still need couriers. The eyes still need feet, and tomorrow you'll carry something new. There's something about imperial cities that makes the morning quieter, heavier. The streets are clean, but somehow sterile. The station staff are polite but brisk. Even the mule, today's beast, is Saturn with flared nostrils, and an apparent distaste for all forms of optimism seems tense, like he's bracing for a surprise inspection from Jupiter himself. You're heading out just as the city starts to stir. Bakers sling flatbread into baskets. A vendor sweeps dust from his mosaic doorstep. But today, your mind's not on scenery, it's on risk. Because you've been given a new satchel, and this one carries dispatches headed toward the borderlands and Rome's borders. They're not exactly known for their hospitality. Today, you'll feel what it means to carry messages when the edges of empire begin to fray, when the postal system finds itself tangled in rebellion, invasions, and outright chaos. Here's your mainstream historical fact. As Rome expanded, it encountered increasing resistance at its borders from Germanic tribes, Parthians, Britons, and more. The cursus publicus had to stretch thin across volatile territories, becoming both lifeline and liability. Messages didn't just bring orders, they brought warnings. The satchel on your hip bears the markings of an Eastern military command. You don't need to read the scrolls to guess their urgency. Troop movement requests, resource shortages, reports of raids, and worse, silence. Sometimes, the absence of a scroll says more than a dozen words. When stations stopped responding, when scrolls stopped coming back, Rome paid attention. Because a silent station often meant an occupied station or one buried under rubble. You guide Saturn along a mountain pass where the wind howls like a bard with poor breath control. Below a broken post station lies half swallowed by vines, probably abandoned years ago. You wonder who the last courier was to sleep there. Did they finish their route, or did the road finish them? Further along, you pass a statue. What remains of one, anyway? A half-cracked Mercury, only the feet and wings intact. A forgotten mile marker. Someone's etched graffiti across the base nulla, via est tuta. No road is safe. You nod. Seems fair. Midday brings a sudden shift. Thunder rolls in the distance, and you spot the remains of a burned cart just off the road. Bits of scroll parchment are scattered in the mud ashes and ink too smeared to read. You check your pouch again instinctively, as if the scrolls could evaporate from fear. A nearby mutatio has seen better days. The stable roof has caved in, and a young boy guards the entrance with a sharpened stick and a gaze far too old for his age. He lets you swap Saturn for a leaner mule named Ghost. No paperwork, just a whispered warning: ride fast. Raiders moved through 2 days ago, took the last courier's boots. You don't ask what happened to the courier, you just ride. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some couriers in volatile zones use decoy satchels filled with false scrolls, generic military reports, grocery lists, or copies of speeches from 3 emperors ago. If intercepted, they'd throw the decoy down and bolt with the real messages tucked under their tunic. It didn't always work, but sometimes it saved a scroll or a life. Historians still argue whether this practice was formally endorsed or just something desperate couriers came up with on their own. Either way, it happened. Your new mule Ghost lives up to the name. Swift, quiet, and disturbingly pale. You press deeper into the borderlands, where the locals eye you with suspicion, and the language shifts subtly in the markets. Latin fades. Accents thicken. Roads crack. You reach the next station just before dusk. It's a fortified outpost, more barracks than Mancio. Soldiers stand at attention as you enter, weapons ready. The clerk who takes your scrolls reads the seal and frowns. Too late, he mutters. You raise an eyebrow. There's a skirmish east of here, he says. That dispatch was for a fort that fell 3 days ago. You want to ask if you're still supposed to deliver it. You don't. Instead, he hands you new scrolls. Take these west. New orders. They'll regroup. And just like that, the mail turns into triage. The cursus publicus wasn't built for war. It was built for order. But out here, order doesn't always apply. Out here, scrolls become survival tools. Messages decide who reinforces what. When food arrives, who retreats and who gets left behind. You eat in silence that night, watching the soldiers polish armor and dice grains out of a shared pot. No wine, no jokes, just grim determination. They know what's coming. You lie awake for hours, listening to ghosts stomp restlessly outside. And as you drift into uneasy sleep, you think of how fragile the empire really is. Not the buildings, not the legions, but the messages. Because when the scrolls stop moving, Rome goes blind. You leave before sunrise. The outpost gate creaks open just wide enough for you and Ghost to slip through, and then it shuts behind you like a warning. No one says goodbye. No one needs to. Out here, every farewell sounds too much like a eulogy. The road west is quiet, too quiet. Not the stillness of peace, but the hollow, uneasy calm that comes after something has gone terribly wrong. You pass mile after mile of untouched countryside, but there's no livestock, no farmers, not even birds. Just the wind and the soft thud of hooves. You're riding into the part of the story where the cursus publicus begins to stumble. The dark age fade out, because nothing, not even Rome, lasts forever. Here's your mainstream historical fact. As the Western Roman Empire declined in the 4th and 5th centuries, the postal system fell apart right along with it. Funding dried up. Roads cracked. Stations were abandoned or overrun. Mules got eaten. Messages stopped arriving. The eyes of the empire closed one at a time until there was nothing left to see. You see it firsthand. The first station you arrive at is silent. Roof caved in, doors gone, ashes in the fireplace. No scrolls, no clerks. You circle the building twice, call out once, then move on. There's nothing for you there. Not even the ghosts have stayed. The next mutatio is a little better. A young man, barely more than a boy, holds down the post alone. His station tablet is a mess of scratched-out names and inconsistent stamps. He offers you water and half a loaf of rye, so hard it could be repurposed as defensive masonry. You ask if he's seen another courier recently. Not in 4 days, he replies, eyes down. You check your pouch. The scrolls are still there. Orders for withdrawal. A requisition for more grain. And a note from a bishop requesting protection for a church library. You tighten the strap. These still matter, even if the world is unraveling. The road ahead is cracked and overgrown with moss and weeds splitting the paving stones like nature's quiet rebellion. Statues have toppled, milestones are buried. You pause at one brushing away dirt to read the name Honorius, the emperor famous for watching it all fall apart. They say when Rome was sacked by the Visigoths in 410, AD, Honorius was so sheltered he didn't even realize it had happened. But I just fed Rome, he supposedly said. Turns out he thought someone meant his pet chicken, also named Rome. Historians still argue whether this anecdote is true or just the world's earliest passive-aggressive roast. You don't see any chickens, just ruins. One town you pass has been half looted. Doors hang open. The bakery is caved in. A scroll lies in the dirt, trampled and wet. You pick it up, and the wax seal is unfamiliar, cracked and faded, probably undelivered. You tuck it into your pouch anyway. Someone might still want it. You begin to see fewer travelers. No carts, no soldiers. Just the occasional farmer, darting into a grove watching from a distance. The empire's reach is shrinking, visible, tangible, like a tide rolling backward and leaving scrolls stranded in the sand. At the next station, what's left of it, you meet a woman named Livia. She runs the place herself, with one mule, no ink, and a pile of broken wax seals she melts down to reuse. I get 2 couriers a week, she says, and 5 deserters a day. She feeds you a thin soup and asks what the latest news is. You pause before answering. Because how do you explain the slow collapse of everything? Still holding, you say. She smiles like she knows you're lying, but appreciates the effort. Here's your quirky tidbit. In the final years of the Western Empire, some towns reverted to older methods of communication. Signal fires word-of-mouth runners even carved wooden tokens carried from market to market. Rome's grand messaging system was slowly, pitifully replaced by what it had once improved upon: progress in reverse. Historians still argue whether the East did any better. Spoiler, they did, but only for a while. You mount up again, your legs stiff, your eyes scanning the trees. A few miles out, you pass a relay hut that's been converted into someone's home. Chickens roost where scrolls were once copied. A young girl sits on the porch, weaving a basket. She doesn't flinch as you pass. You nod. She doesn't nod back. And suddenly, it hits you. Not just the loss of efficiency or the collapse of organization, but the disconnection. Messages used to stitch this world together. They carried meaning across provinces, voices across years. Now, the seams are fraying. Villages don't know what cities are doing. Governors act on rumor. Families grow apart. A courier once delivered news of an emperor's death 2 years after it happened. The recipient shrugged and said, "Oh, I'd wondered why the coins changed. 2 years." You arrive at a final station for the night. It's a stone building, still intact, run by a family now instead of the state. The father sharpens tools, while the son tends to the mule. The daughter offers you a clean blanket. "You're welcome to stay," she says. Few still come through. You eat a meal that tastes like hospitality and memory. And for a moment, you don't feel like a messenger of a dying system. You feel like the last thread, trying to hold a tapestry together. As you settle into sleep, scrolls still under your head like a pillow. Of promises, you wonder when the roads fall silent. What happens to the stories you ride east now? The path curls like a ribbon, tossed across the land, pulling you toward what the Romans still whisper about, with a mix of pride and resignation: Byzantium. Constantinople, the Eastern Empire. If the West is crumbling like old bread, the East is attempting a rebake with more gold leaf and stricter dress codes. You feel the change almost immediately. The roads are smoother, the stations better maintained, and the clerks less likely to cry when you hand them scrolls. It's like stepping into a version of the empire that still believes in itself. And yes, the mules here have names like Themistocles and Sophia. Yours today, Imperator, a majestic two-clean beast who snorts at every hill as if personally offended by gravity. You're not just heading into a functioning system. You're entering a Byzantine reboot. Here's your mainstream historical fact. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, the Eastern Roman Empire, what we now call the Byzantine Empire, continued and even refined the cursus publicus, operating a robust postal and intelligence network well into the Middle Ages. They renamed it the cursus vellex, or the publicum cursus, depending on the period and the emperor's mood. But the purpose stayed the same: messages, mandates, surveillance, and control. Only now, everything is shinier. You ride past relay stations with actual mosaic flooring. Some have carved icons above the doors, Christ flanked by winged messengers, scroll in hand. The empire may have changed gods, but it still worships order. At your first station stop, a scribe takes your scroll pouch and unseals the wax with a custom knife that has mother-of-pearl inlay. You blink. He doesn't. They copy the scrolls using a scriptorium staffed by 2 monks, and a glass oil lamp shaped like a dove. There's a strict logbook system filed by region and urgency. You're offered warm bread, soft cheese, and dates. You stare at the food like it's a trap. But no, it's just Constantinople standards. You rest briefly before remounting Imperador, who, judging by his smug chewing, has acquired a taste for high-end oats. The route ahead brings you closer to the coast where ships from Syria and Egypt dock with goods and occasionally messages. Because the Byzantines, they didn't stop at roads. They integrated sea routes into their messaging system, creating hybrid chains of couriers who'd ride from one coastal city to another, then hand the message off to a naval dispatch. Scrolls that once took weeks to move by mule could now hopscotch across provinces in half the time. Here's your quirky tidbit. At one point, the Byzantine court employed imperial runners who dressed in bright crimson tunics and were known for chanting while they ran. Not for religious reasons. No, the chanting helped them pace their breathing on long runs. Think of it as ancient jogging playlists, but live and tunic-clad. Historians still argue whether this made them faster or just really annoying. By mid-afternoon, you arrive at a mansio so elaborate it could pass for a minor villa. Gold leaf on the doorframe, fresh reed mats, even a brass gong for arrivals. You enter cautiously. It feels like a trick. A young eunuch with a shaved head and perfectly balanced scroll case approaches. "May I see your pouch?" You show him the official seal. He bows. "You'll be staying the night," he says. "The next station is under repair due to," he checks a note, "unruly goats." Some things never change. The scriptorium here is practically a library. Scrolls, codices, wax tablets, and even early parchment bound in wooden covers. Proto-books. The scribes use goose feather quills and ink imported from the Black Sea. One even wears gloves to avoid smudging. Gloves for ink. Later, over a carefully prepared meal involving stuffed grape leaves and possibly the softest bread you've ever encountered, another courier regales you with stories of delivering edict duplicates to Cyprus by boat dodging pirates and flirting with sea captains the whole way. You ask him what the message was. "Tax revisions," he says, sipping wine. Always tax revisions. Byzantine bureaucracy, it turns out, makes the Roman Senate look like a toga party in comparison. Every scroll must be copied twice, signed by 3 officials, and stamped with at least one religious emblem, just in case heaven is watching. But it works. Here, unlike the ghost roads of the West, the network still breathes. It's held together by faith gold and an almost pathological fear of disorganization. Historians still argue whether this structure helped the Byzantines outlive the West, or if it simply delayed the inevitable. But for now, you marvel at how intact it all feels. The roads are swept. The mules are brushed. The couriers, yourself included, still matter. You find yourself wondering, is this what the old empire looked like in its prime? Or is it just a good copy? That night, you sleep on a mattress that doesn't creak under a roof, that doesn't leak with a mule in the stable who doesn't kick. And for the first time in weeks, you dream not of ash and ruins, but of scrolls arriving on time. Your dream lingers a little longer than usual. A vivid image of scrolls dancing across golden tiles. Couriers gliding like ghosts, and an emperor whispering instructions into your ear while petting a very smug mule. Then you wake up And remember, the mule probably bit someone in real life. Imperator is already saddled and waiting when you step outside, his mane brushed hooves polished, an expression unchanged, a mix of contempt and readiness. You thank the station staff, accept a farewell bundle of nuts and figs, and begin your ride into the layers of the past. Because today, your path leads not to a living outpost, but to ruins. You're tracing the legacy in the layers, riding over ancient routes that have been reused, repaved, or simply swallowed by time. Beneath your feet, the Roman world still pulses faintly under newer cities, newer empires, newer chaos. The roads may be worn, but they're not gone. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Much of Europe and the Mediterranean world still sits atop the bones of Roman infrastructure. Modern cities, highways, and even postal routes follow the same paths laid down by Roman surveyors over 2,000 years ago. The cursus publicus may have vanished, but its skeleton remains. The first place you encounter is an old mansio, or what's left of it. It's now part of a roadside inn. Its original Roman stones reused for the foundation. The current owner, a wrinkled man with a suspicious mustache and an impressive collection of cheese, points out the old milestone embedded in the back wall. Still says, "To Ravenna," he grins, though no one's gone that way in decades. You trace the letters with your fingers worn smooth, but still legible. The empire may fall, but stone remembers. You continue riding through farmland where rows of grapevines follow the exact curve of an ancient road. Farmers long ago realized that the Roman path was the most efficient route between two markets, and so the vineyards marched in line. Even the water channels nearby, overgrown, half-buried hint at old Roman aqueduct supports. Once messages flowed with the same confidence that water did. Now, the water's doing better. Midday brings you to a small town that proudly declares itself the site of the old station. There's a plaque, bilingual, weather-worn, detailing how the local statio once processed over 300 scrolls a year during the reign of Diocletian. The numbers may be exaggerated, but the pride is real. You're offered bread and a slice of salted meat by a woman selling olives from a stall built atop Roman flagstones. She doesn't know what a cursus publicus is, but she points to the road and says, "Always busy, this one. Still is." Here's your quirky tidbit. In the 1800s, early archaeologists often mistook Roman postal stations for temples because of the size and quality of the buildings. One British traveler insisted he'd discovered a shrine to Mercury god of messages, only to later realize he'd been sleeping in the remains of a scribe's dormitory. Historians still argue whether he actually knew the truth and just liked the poetry. You ride onward, and as you move through layers of history, modern structures above Roman ones, Christian churches built over pagan courthouses, you start to feel like a palimpsest yourself. A courier moving through centuries instead of provinces. You arrive at a way station that's been converted into a bus stop, literally. There's a bench, a timetable, and a small overhang where modern couriers now wait, clutching phones instead of scrolls. One glances up as you ride by. He's wearing earbuds. You smile. He doesn't notice. The road curves through a town with modern asphalt laid directly atop old Roman foundations. Somewhere beneath your mule's hooves are centuries of tread, from legionnaires to ox carts to postal riders like you. And all of them, all of us, were trying to do the same thing, carry a message from one person to another. Simple, profound, exhausting. You pass another milestone shattered in two. One half sits embedded in a school courtyard. The other leaned against a bakery wall where pigeons rest. It reads, MP from Rome. Miles, not meters. Rome is long gone, but someone still sees it as the center. That evening, you stop at a Mancio-turned museum. The curator, an older man with ink-stained fingers and a voice like velvet, gives you a brief tour. This wall, he says, was once the scriptorium. And here, this trench. That was the stable drain. And this, yes, this was the inscription tablet. It's mostly missing now. Just a few carved letters remain. Ursus P. Bleak. You don't need the rest. You know it by heart. You thank the curator and prepare to leave. Before you go, he presses a small scroll into your hand. A reproduction, he explains, but it's a copy of a real message sent by a provincial governor to Trajan. About taxes, of course. They're always about taxes. You tuck it into your pouch. A reminder that history is never really gone. It just changes writers. As night falls and you settle down beside a pile of old stones, you look back on the day and realize something strange. You're riding on the same roads, delivering the same kind of messages, facing the same doubts. But you're also delivering memory. And somewhere beneath the fields and cobblestones, the old system breathes shallow and slow, but alive. The wind is calm this morning, not still, just gentle. It brushes your cheeks with that sleepy, early hour softness that makes everything feel slower, safer. You tighten the scroll pouch one last time. Just a few left now. And though the route today is short, it feels like the end of something, or maybe just the whisper of an ending. You pass a crumbling postmarker not far from the main road, half buried in earth, worn smooth by weather and time. There's no inscription left, only the faint curve of a once-etched R. Maybe it once read Roma, maybe not. But that doesn't matter, because you know it did. You're following whispers from the dust now. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Despite the fall of both Eastern and Western empires, archaeologists continue to find remnants of the cursus publicus, abandoned outposts, fragments of scrolls, rusted, writing styluses, worn milestone stumps. Rome's postal network was so vast, so embedded into the bones of its civilization, that its echoes still surface today beneath parking lots, behind chapel walls, even under vineyards. And while most of the roads you've ridden have faded or changed, a few remain untouched, frozen, like time didn't get the memo. You're on one of them now. Each stone beneath your mule's hooves. Today's beast is called Dusty, by the way. And he lives up to the name, has been worn smooth by 2,000 years of footsteps. Soldiers, senators, scribes, strangers, every one of them thinking just like you. Will this message make it? You arrive in a small, empty clearing where a mancio once stood. Nothing remains now but moss-covered foundations and a stubborn corner wall reaching up into nothing. There's no plaque here, no museum, just silence. You dismount and sit on the stone scroll pouch in your lap. You're not due at the next town until tomorrow, and there's no hurry. No station master to glare at you, no scribe waiting for ink, just the sound of birds in the trees and the long, slow exhale of an empire that once tried to hear itself think. Here's your quirky tidbit. 1. Excavated post station in modern-day Serbia was found to contain half-burned wax tablets, a broken amphora labeled with the name Crispus, and a single, preserved mule harness still hanging on the wall. No scrolls, no bones. Just that lonely harness, like the rider had simply stepped out for lunch and never returned. Historians still argue whether it was abandoned mid-message or simply left behind during a retreat. But everyone agrees on one thing. It was once important, and that's what strikes you most. This entire system, the cursus publicus, the scrolls, the seals, the sandals, the mules with names both noble and absurd, it was built on a single belief that information matters. That sending word from here to there changes things. That connection, even when it's slow, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's delivered by a sleep-deprived courier with sore legs and suspicious wine breath, is worth maintaining. You take a scroll from the pouch. It's not addressed to anyone in particular, just a record, an account of message deliveries. You wonder if you're supposed to archive it. You wonder if anyone's left to care. But you don't burn it. You wrap it in oilcloth, weigh it down with a stone, and bury it beside the wall. Maybe someone will find it. Maybe not. But it will be there tucked into the earth waiting. A whisper from the dust. You mount Dusty again and turn toward the next ridge. The sun is setting behind you, casting long shadows forward, as if your journey is being chased by time itself. And you let it chase you, because that's what this work is. That's what it's always been. Not glory, not conquest, just carrying the message. And now, it's time to rest. As the path levels out and the stars begin to prick the sky, your mule slows and the sounds of travel fade behind you. The road beneath you is still warm from the day, smooth and familiar beneath your mount's tired steps. The scrolls are delivered. The stations are quiet. The empire, for now, sleeps. And you, courier of forgotten kingdoms and fading empires, you breathe easier. The weight of the pouch is gone. Your muscles ache, but in that sweet, well-earned way. You think of the thousands of riders before you, their names lost, their messages long unread. But they rode, and so did you. Let your mind drift now, not into the worries of today or the errands of tomorrow, but into that quiet, endless highway beneath the stars. The one that winds through memory and ruins. The one that connects past and present, not with speed, but with care. Hear the slow crunch of gravel, the whisper of wind in olive leaves, the low, steady breath of the mule at your side. There's nothing more to deliver. There's no more deadline. Only the gentle, ceaseless rhythm of hoofbeats and heartbeats, soft and even now. The empire may have fallen, but you made the last delivery, and that courier is enough. Sleep well.